The land had forgotten water. It cracked open like old skin, blistered and groaning under the endless weight of sun. Nothing grew. Not the wheat, not the grass, not even the weeds had the will to fight anymore. The wind came and went like a curse, sharp, dry, dragging with it thin spirals of dust that clung to windows, to throats, to memory. They called this place Mercy Station, though no mercy had been seen in years. Just a name painted half-faded on a rotting sign by the railroad. No trains stopped anymore. The station clock still ticked, though the hour hand was missing. One street, 6 buildings. A saloon that no longer served whiskey. A church that rang no bell. A post office where no letters came. And houses with boarded windows and broken doors, like mouths held shut by grief. The sky was the color of bone. Men sat on porches with nothing to say. Women moved like they were walking underwater. Children learned to be silent before they learned to speak. Everyone was waiting for something that would not come. In one of the houses, on the southern edge of town, where the fence had blown away and no one bothered to fix it, lived a man with too many daughters and not enough food. He used to smile once, used to sing when he fixed the fence, when he lit the lamp, when he kissed his wife, but she had gone quiet in childbirth, and he never sang again. The house still smelled of dry wood and forgotten meals. The floor creaked like it was morning. The bed sagged in the middle. The air inside was hotter than outside, as if the walls held on to suffering like heat. The daughters slept in one room, 6 in total, each smaller than the last. Their dresses were patched, their feet bare. They didn't cry. Crying meant you had something left to lose. There was no food that morning, not for the 3rd day. The father sat at the table staring at a single cracked plate. The wind howled through a broken pane. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. Something inside him had stopped. He reached under the floorboards, pulled out a bundle of paper and a rusted revolver. The papers were debt notices, red stamped and curled at the corners. The gun had 2 bullets. He didn't look at either long. He set the revolver aside. The girls watched him from the doorway, eyes like dry wells, wide but empty. Only the youngest sat apart, near the window, cradling a ragged doll missing its face. She was pale even for this land, and she never made a sound. That night he built the platform. He worked without words, without light, nailing together warped boards in the town square. The townspeople watched, but no one asked. They understood. That's what the dust had done. It scraped the humanity off until all that was left was bone and survival. By morning it stood like an altar. Not to God, but to hunger. He lined the girls up by height, brushed their hair with his fingers, not affectionately, but methodically, like a farmer sorting crop. They did not resist. One by one, they climbed the steps. The youngest didn't. She stayed behind, doll pressed to her chest, sitting cross-legged in the dirt. The first man arrived with a mule and a sack of flour. He didn't look at their faces. The first man was lean and sun-bleached, with shoulders that stooped as if burdened by more than age. He tied his mule to a fence post and dragged the sack of flour behind him, like a prize or an apology. His boots kicked up a low wave of dust as he approached the platform. He didn't speak, just pointed. One of the girls, third from the left, stepped forward. The father nodded once. The girl hesitated only briefly, then stepped down from the platform and took the man's hand. She never looked back. The flour thumped onto the boards like thunder in a dry church. The father took it without ceremony and slid it behind him. More men came. One brought a set of worn boots, still good for walking. Another offered a goat with ribs like piano keys. A third had bullets, not many but enough to matter. They traded without eye contact, without sound. Each girl left quietly. Each man disappeared down the road with something he'd never earned. By midday, only 2 daughters remained. One stood straight and still, the sun striking her hair like copper. She looked too old for her frame, as if hunger had hollowed her into something sharp and bitter. The other, barely 9, rubbed at her sleeves like they itched, her gaze always shifting toward the horizon, toward escape. The father hesitated before giving them up. His hand trembled once, but only once. He took a hunting knife in trade for the older girl, a cured ham for the younger. The knife was dull. The ham was sour. But the weight of no mouths to feed was its own kind of relief. Only the youngest remained. She had not moved from the dirt. Dust had settled into her hair like snow. Her pale skin shimmered in the heat, and the doll in her arms looked more like a bundle of rags now. Nothing human. She hadn't been offered. She hadn't been asked. She had simply been left behind by silence. The townspeople watched from behind windows, through slats in barn walls, from behind cracked glass and curtains that had once been lace. No one said a word. They all understood. She was the one no one would want. There were no more buyers, just the wind, the shifting of boots on gravel, and the slow creak of the platform under the father's weight. He didn't look at her, not once. He picked up the sack of flour, threw it over his shoulder, walked back to the house that had once held 6 voices and now only held ghosts. He didn't close the door behind him. The girl remained sitting, unmoving, doll held close. The sun passed its peak, and her shadow stretched long across the ground, thin as thread. The wind picked up. Dust blew across the square in waves, erasing boot prints, blurring bloodstains, burying small memories. A train passed on the horizon. It did not stop. The sky began to dim. The wind moaned through broken shutters like an old woman grieving. Still she sat. Still no one came. Until just before nightfall, when the light bent low and the town turned to silhouette, a figure appeared at the far edge of the road. On horseback, moving slow, as if pulled forward not by reins, but by something deeper. Something that didn't live in the body anymore. He rode straight into town, not looking left or right, and when he saw her, he stopped, but he didn't dismount. Not yet. He sat still in the saddle for a long while, as if unsure whether the town was real or just the last trick of the road. The horse beneath him was dark and narrow, ribs showing, mane tangled from distance and disuse. Its eyes were dull, but it did not sway. The man wore black, not the polished black of a preacher, but the dust-choked black of someone who had buried too much to ever wear color again. His coat hung heavy off his frame, thick wool faded at the cuffs, and there was a burn hole near the left shoulder, ragged edges burned into threadbare cloth. His eyes, shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, scanned the empty street and the platform. The pale girl still sat there, cradling her faceless doll, untouched by time or mercy. The wind had slowed, as if waiting. He slipped from the saddle quietly, boots sinking into the dust with the soft weight of grief. He moved closer, slow and steady, like a ghost reluctant to wake the living. The town held its breath. The girl did not flinch, did not blink. Her eyes were pools of quiet waiting, reflecting the dying light. He reached out a gloved hand and laid a folded coat over her shoulders. The fabric swallowed her frail frame like a blanket against the cold desert night. From inside his coat, he withdrew a small worn photograph, edges curled, creased with age and care. A little girl smiled back at the world from the faded image, bright and alive. He placed the photograph beside her rag doll, a silent offering. Behind him, the town remained motionless. The wind whispered through broken windows and empty door frames, carrying with it the scent of old sorrow and new beginnings. Without a word, he lifted the girl into his arms. Fragile as dust, yet heavier than any burden he had carried. The horse neighed softly, breaking the silence. Together they turned away from the platform, away from the auction, away from Mercy Station. The stars began to pierce the darkening sky, watching quietly as a man carried hope across the dust. The man walked slowly toward the edge of town, carrying the pale girl close. Her small body was lighter than he expected, but every step felt heavier with the weight of what had been left behind. The wind whispered low, rustling through cracked boards and loose nails, as if the town itself mourned. Mercy Station dissolved behind them like a fading ghost. The sun dipped lower, bleeding orange and crimson into the sky, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers over the dusty ground. The horse followed silently, hooves stirring soft clouds that drifted away like forgotten promises. The silence between rider and child was thick, not empty, but full of unsaid words and buried pain. The man's eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the last glimmer of light clung stubbornly to the earth. His face was a map of old scars, a landscape carved by years of loss and regret. The coat he'd wrapped around the girl was worn, but sturdy, a fragile shield against the harsh world outside. The girl clutched her rag doll tightly, her pale hands trembling ever so slightly. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. Her eyes held stories that no one dared to ask. Behind them, Mercy Station grew smaller with every step, a pinprick swallowed by the vast, indifferent desert. The road ahead was long, uncertain, and unforgiving. But for the first time in a long while, the man felt something stir inside, a fragile ember in the endless night. And somewhere deep in that ember, a whisper of hope. The sun sank beneath the horizon, bleeding its last warm hues into the sky before surrendering to the cold wash of night. The desert stretched wide and unyielding, a vast ocean of shadows and silence. Stars blinked awake, distant and indifferent, as the man and the girl moved slowly beneath their gaze. They had left Mercy Station behind, but its dust still clung to their boots and the edges of their souls. The wind whispered through the sparse brush and cracked earth, carrying faint echoes of voices lost to time, laughter, cries, promises broken. The girl's breath was shallow, barely stirring the rag doll she still held tightly. Her pale skin seemed to glow faintly under the silver moonlight, fragile as a ghost. The coat wrapped around her was threadbare but warm, a thin barrier against the creeping chill. The man's eyes, dark and weathered, scanned the landscape as if searching for a place that might hold more than pain. His hands tightened around the reins, knuckles whitening. The past weighed on him like chains. But tonight, for a moment, those chains felt lighter. There was no campfire, no comforting glow, only the cold hush of the desert night. The horse's steady breathing was the only sound besides the soft shifting of sand and the distant call of a coyote. He stopped near a cluster of weathered stones, places where others had left traces long before. Setting the girl down gently, he looked up at the sky, tracing constellations that had guided travelers for centuries. The girl's eyes met his for a brief moment, quiet, unreadable. In that silence, a bridge was built, between loss and hope, between what had been and what might still be. Night wrapped them in its vast, lonely embrace, but for once the man did not feel entirely alone. The first light crept over the horizon like a slow sigh, brushing the edges of the desert with soft gold. The cold night surrendered to the sun's quiet promise, and the shadows retreated into cracks and crevices, swallowed by the waking earth. The man stirred, muscles aching from the weight of the journey and the burdens he carried. The girl lay curled beneath the faded coat, her breath shallow but steady. Dust clung to their skin and clothes, a reminder of the miles traveled and the past left behind. The wind had softened to a gentle breeze, carrying the scent of dry earth and sagebrush. It whispered through the sparse trees, threading the quiet morning with faint hope. Around them the desert seemed less empty, as if waking with them, sharing the fragile moment between night and day. The man's eyes traced the distant ridges, searching for a sign, a place where the broken could find some rest, where silence might become something more than a wound. The girl's pale fingers twitched in sleep, clutching the rag doll as if it were a lifeline. Her stillness held a fragile grace, a fragile beauty in a world cracked by loss. He reached out, brushing dust from her brow, with a tenderness that surprised even him. No words came, just the weight of quiet love and the steady beat of two hearts moving forward through the endless dust. The road ahead stretched wide and uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it held a trace of light. The sun rose higher, burning away the last of the morning mist and turning the desert into a shimmering sea of heat. The earth beneath their feet cracked and hissed, the dry silence broken only by the soft crunch of boots and hooves on the gravel. The man moved steadily, each step deliberate, the pale girl cradled close. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, distant and unreadable, reflecting the relentless glare of the sun. Dust settled on their clothes, their skin, the remnants of a world left behind. Behind them, faint tracks marked their passage, fading quickly beneath the wind's ceaseless fingers. The road stretched out endlessly, a ribbon of dust curling over hills and disappearing into the haze. The man's thoughts drifted to what they had lost, the voices that once filled the house, the laughter now silenced forever. The weight of those memories pressed on him like a stone in his chest. Yet the girl's presence, pale and silent, was a fragile beacon amid the desolation. She carried no words, no complaints, only the quiet resilience of someone who had survived too much. The wind stirred once more, scattering dust in swirls that danced like ghosts. The man tightened his grip, feeling the cold bite of uncertainty ahead. Still, they moved forward, because beyond the fading trails there might still be something worth finding. The sky grew heavy with clouds, gray and brooding, casting a muted light over the endless desert. The wind had shifted, colder now, carrying whispers of distant storms and lost places. In the hollow of a rocky outcrop, the man found a shallow cave, a silent shelter carved by time and wind. He lowered the pale girl gently to the ground, laying her down on a bed of worn blankets tucked deep into the shadowed crevice. The walls of the shelter bore the scars of countless seasons, cracks etched like scars, stones smoothed by ceaseless erosion. Outside, the wind howled softly, rattling loose pebbles and stirring dry leaves in mournful patterns. The man settled nearby, his coat pulled tight against the chill that seeped into bones. The girl's eyes fluttered open briefly, her gaze meeting his with quiet trust. No words were spoken, but a fragile bond grew stronger in the shared silence. Two souls marred by loss, finding solace in the smallest moments. The desert night deepened, stars flickering through gaps in the rock above, distant and eternal witnesses to the fragile life below. Inside the silent shelter, time seemed to pause, a breath held in the vast loneliness of the world. And in that stillness, hope took root. Dawn seeped softly into the cave's mouth, spilling pale light over the sleeping figures wrapped in tattered blankets. The man stirred first, eyes heavy but alert, scanning the horizon beyond the shelter. The desert's vast emptiness stretched endlessly, a canvas painted with shifting hues of amber and rust. The pale girl remained still, her chest rising and falling with fragile breaths. Dust clung to her eyelashes, a fine veil born from the relentless wind outside. The man brushed it away carefully, a silent act of tenderness against the harshness surrounding them. Outside, the wind began its mournful song, carrying echoes of lost footsteps and forgotten promises. The man's mind wandered to the past, faces blurred by time, the ache of absence, the hollow spaces where love once lived. Yet in this quiet, in the fragile life before him, he found a flicker of something precious, a reason to endure. The horse stood patiently nearby, muscles tense but steady, a steadfast companion in the solitude. The man rose slowly, gathering their few belongings with care. The desert awaited, vast and unforgiving, but the road called them forward. Each step stirred the dust, whispers of the past fading into the endless horizon. They moved on. By late afternoon, the sun glared like an angry god, casting long shadows across the crumbling remnants of a chapel half swallowed by the earth. The roof had caved in years ago. Pews lay splintered and overturned, and wind had carved soft scars in the stone walls where prayers once echoed. The man approached cautiously. The girl held close to his chest. This place was not marked on maps. It wasn't meant to be found, and yet something had drawn him to it. Perhaps memory, perhaps instinct. Inside, light streamed through shattered stained glass, casting broken colors across the floor. The girl blinked slowly at the flickering reds and blues on her arms, unmoving otherwise. He set her gently on the one pew still standing, its wood warm and worn smooth by years of devotion. Dust motes floated through the air like ash. Time was thick here, not measured in seconds or hours, but in absences. At the front, a wooden cross leaned crookedly against a wall, split at the base. Beneath it, something half-buried caught the man's eye. A pair of rusted spurs and a child's hair ribbon, faded blue. He stood silent for a long time. The girl looked toward him, not speaking, not blinking. He said nothing. There were no words left for what had happened here. But still he bowed his head, not in prayer, but in memory, of the girl he had lost and the girl before him now. Outside, thunder rumbled far off, slow and deliberate. They would not stay long, but the dead deserved to be remembered. The first raindrop fell like a warning. It struck the dust and vanished instantly, leaving a tiny dark mark. Then came another, and another, until the ground shimmered with the hush of a coming storm. The wind picked up, frantic now, tugging at clothes and hair, scattering dry leaves across the bones of the chapel. The man stepped out into the open, scanning the sky. Heavy clouds rolled low and fast, bruised purple and black, as if the heavens themselves were grieving. Behind him, the girl stood in the doorway, unmoving. Rain dotted her face, but she didn't flinch. She watched him the way someone watches the sea, knowing it can both cradle and destroy. He led the horse from under the skeletal remains of the bell tower and checked the saddle. Time was running thin. The land was about to turn wild. Lightning flashed behind the hills, brief and jagged. The girl climbed into the saddle without being told. She held her doll in one hand, her other gripping the edge of the saddle horn with quiet determination. The man mounted behind her, his arms bracketing her sides, a shield against the wind. They rode into the storm without hesitation. The rain came hard now, thick and fast, soaking through cloth and skin. The desert became a sheet of trembling silver. Thunder cracked across the sky like a whip, and the horse responded, hooves pounding into wet earth, carrying them forward through wind and fury. The man's thoughts were loud inside his head, louder than the storm, voices of the past, of mistakes made, of love lost. He wanted to silence them, but the storm would do that for him. The girl pressed herself back into him, small and warm and alive. He held tighter. There was no destination. Not yet. Only the road and the storm, and the beating of two hearts against a world that had tried to forget them. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world quieter than before, soaked in silence, dripping with memory. The desert, washed clean, smelled of wet stone and sage, the scent of something old made briefly new. The horse moved slowly now, its breath heavy, hooves sinking into softened earth. Mud clung to their boots. The wind was gentle again, as if the rage of the night before had been a fever, now broken. The man didn't speak. He hadn't spoken in days. Words were unnecessary and perhaps unwelcome in a world that answered only with silence. He kept his eyes forward, always forward. The girl dozed in the saddle, her arms limp around the worn neck of her doll. Her face was pale, but peaceful. The first time he'd seen peace settle over her, even if only in sleep. They passed the remnants of another settlement, or maybe it had just been a home once, a door with no walls, a rusted tin roof half buried in sand, an old cradle, overturned and split down the middle. The man paused. The horse shifted. Something had happened here. Something final. The kind of ending that leaves stains, not scars. He climbed down and walked the site slowly. The girl stayed atop the horse, watching. Near the edge of the ruin, a single stone stuck out of the ground, rough-hewn, unmarked. But at its base, 3 tiny marbles rested, red, green, blue. He knelt, stared at them for a long time. Then he took nothing, changed nothing. Some ghosts didn't want to be disturbed. Others didn't need to be. He stood again, slower this time, joints stiff from rain and memory. The road behind them was washed nearly clean, as if what came before could be erased by a single night of reckoning. But the road ahead remained, still long, still waiting. He climbed back into the saddle, and they rode on. 2 shapes against a horizon that never got closer, carrying nothing except what couldn't be left behind. The sun dipped low again, red and round, casting long shadows over the hills. It lit the path ahead in gold and blood, as if warning them, this is where things end or begin again. The house stood at the edge of a canyon, not abandoned, not quite lived in. The wood was sun-bleached and brittle, the windows unblinking. Its roof sagged, and its porch leaned like an old man watching the wind. There was no door. The man dismounted slowly, legs stiff, boots sinking into the dry grass. The girl slid off behind him and stood without needing to be held. She looked at the house the way one looks at a photograph of someone they've never met but somehow remember. The place felt known. Inside, the floorboards creaked in long-forgotten patterns. Dust hung in the air, catching the fading light like tiny falling stars. A chair sat by the hearth, still upright. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall, warped and gray. The scent was old. Wood smoke, rain, and something else, something warm. The man moved through the space like a shadow returning to its source. He touched nothing, but everything touched him. He saw, without seeing, the outlines of a life. A small bed in the corner, a rusted kettle, a doll like hers long ago, faded to nothing. The girl stood at the center of the room, not asking, not expecting, just standing. He knelt and placed his hand on the floor. It felt solid, real. For the first time, he imagined staying, not just passing through. Outside, the wind shifted. A different kind of silence settled in. Not empty, but full. Full of memory, of what had been lost, of what might be found. He turned to the girl. She was watching him. He nodded once, and she sat. Night came gently this time, without thunder, without threat. The sky above the canyon bled slowly into darkness, stars kindling like embers, quiet and patient. The house stood still, breathing in the silence, holding its shape in the cool air. Inside, a small fire cracked in the hearth, the first flame it had known in years. It cast long shadows on the warped floorboards and warmed the chill from the girl's pale hands. She sat beside it, still clutching the doll, but looser now, less like a shield, more like something remembered. The man leaned in the doorway, his coat hung from a nail. His rifle rested in the corner, untouched. His hat lay on the table, brim curled from sun and rain. He had said her name aloud for the first time earlier that day. Not the one she had been given before. A new name, software unremarkable, but it belonged to her now, shaped by the road and the silence and the choosing of it. He hadn't asked if she wanted it. He had offered it, like a gift placed gently at her feet, and she had not turned away. Now they shared this broken house at the edge of the world, not healed, but paused, not safe, but not hunted. The fire cracked. The wind outside moved around the walls without pressing in. The stars kept watch. And for the first time in a long time, the man felt the weight of his grief not lifted, but balanced, countered by the quiet presence of the girl who had once been unwanted, the one left behind. She had not been chosen at the auction, but she had been chosen now. And when morning came, they would step outside together, not to run, not to search, but simply to live.